Hi, I'm Gina Marie Drop from Four Walls Theater. Welcome to our YouTube channel, and I'm here today with playwright Michelle Tyrene Johnson, who wrote Rites of Passage, which is our upcoming production on July 10th, 2020 at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, and 5 p.m. Pacific. I'm going to talk a little bit about Four Walls if this is your first time visiting our channel before I jump into my interview with Michelle. Four Walls Theater is a socially responsible grassroots theater that was founded at the end of March this year by Alana Gardner, our artistic director. It was founded in the face of the COVID-19 crisis to join together social services and fine arts of theater to provide art and community and performance on a virtual platform. If you'd like to read more about our mission, past productions, and what we want to do in the future, you can find our new website, fourwallstheater.com, or you can look for more past information on our social media, which has been running since April, on Four Walls Theater Facebook page, at Four Theater on Twitter, and at Four Walls Theater on Instagram. Our mission at Four Walls Theater is to pair art with charitable giving. So every show is paired with a spotlighted charity, and this show is paired with Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter was founded in 2013 in response to the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's murderer. Black Lives Matter Foundation, Inc. is a global organization in the US, UK, and Canada whose mission is to eradicate white supremacy and build local power to intervene in violence inflicted on Black communities by the state and vigilantes. By combating and countering acts of violence, creating space for Black imagination and innovation, and centering Black joy, we are winning immediate improvements in our lives. That's directly from the Black Lives Matter mission page, and you can find more about this organization at blacklivesmatter.com. We are really excited to support this cause as our spotlighted charity with Rites of Passage. I'm now happy to introduce Michelle Tyrene Johnson, our playwright. Michelle Tyrene Johnson is a public radio journalist, author, and speaker from Kansas City, Missouri area, who now lives in Louisville, Kentucky. As a playwright, Johnson's plays have been staged nationally, including in California, Texas, Illinois, Connecticut, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Kentucky. Several of her plays, such as Wiccans in the Hood, The Negro Whisperer, Trading Races, From Rodney King to Paula Deen, Echoes of Octavia, and The Green Book Wine Club Train Trip, have been in New York City festivals and readings. Her play, One Day a Year, was chosen for the Kennedy Center's 2020 New Vision, New Voices Festival, and recently received an award from the National Endowment for the Arts for its world premiere at the Coterie Theater in Kansas City, Missouri. Thank you so much for joining me today, Michelle.
Hey, Gina.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Hey, in the middle of a regular pandemic and a racial pandemic, so I'm good. I'm good.
I find that the how are you question is really loaded these days and
It is.
sometimes hard to answer and can create a lot of pressure. So I'm so happy that you're able to be here and for us to learn a lot more about you as an artist. So I'm going to jump right into the first question if you're ready.
Sure.
Cool. So you're a woman who wears many hats, having multiple degrees in law and journalism, as well as a forthcoming MFA in playwriting. When did you know that you were a writer? And does your creative writing go further than playwriting? Do you do any other types of creative writing?
It's funny because I was the kid who actually liked writing papers. There are the people who bitched about writing papers, and like, you're a fellow writer, you understand that. I mean, I I didn't mind writing a paper. I mean, I would take a paper over a test any day of the week.
Yeah.
Um, any day of the week. So taking myself seriously as a professional writer, that's a tough one because I was a newspaper reporter when I was a lot younger, and you still don't really think of yourself as a writer when you're a
Mm-hmm.
journalist, even though you're writing. I started writing novels and short stories when I was in my 20s, but honestly, I kind of suck at it. Um, and one of the things I realized about playwriting is that the things I was good at as a novelist and as a short story writer were character and dialogue, not so
Hmm.
good at description and the rest of it. But I'm like,
Hmm.
oh, when you write plays, you get to cut out the ugly middleman of describing things. Okay, that's my jam right there. So
Yeah, you get to do it in the action.
exactly, one of my favorite pieces of advice that somebody gave me early on was that you just can't put in the stage directions that Jill wore a red hat. You have to have a character go, I will snatch that red hat right off your head, and then they have to have the red hat.
Yeah,
So
that is a battle. It's a battle of how much your stage directions are going to stick. So that's a really good trick because I'm a young playwright as well. And
yep.
that's good. I'm going to
I
keep that
love
in my
that.
bank.
When somebody gave me that piece of advice, I said, "Oh, I love that." And then I've been in many
Yes.
a rehearsal where it's like, okay, because I had it in the dialogue, now they're all scrambling around trying to find X.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So you always knew you were a writer, you enjoyed writing, and you do this creative playwriting and this journalism. Can you talk a little bit about your writing process? What kind of motivates you to write a new play?
You know, I think what motivates me, I start off with um something burning in me that I want to write about. I tend to go, what's the topic I want to write about, or what's the point I want to land on? And then I go, what characters does it take to get into a story
Mm.
that would go there? And I think that is why, I have lots of weaknesses as a playwright, but I think my strength is characters, because I try to start off with, how can, even if it's a fantasy world, how can I make these characters something that people can connect with? People that, where they will go along on whatever ride I take them on if they like the characters. I don't mean like as in, oh, you want to have dinner with them necessarily. Sometimes the characters are kind of despicable, but the kind of despicable where it's like, okay, but I still want to know what they're going to say or do next.
Yeah, they keep you engaged. You love either to love them or to dislike them.
Mhm.
I have to definitely echo the sentiment that that's a strong suit in your writing. We were lucky enough to have you in our first rehearsal for Rites of Passage and talked about the humanity that every single one of your characters has, even the ones that do horrible, horrible acts. There's
Mhm.
still elements in them where you can see that they are a person. You can see their roots, where they think that they're coming from with good intentions, and that is really powerful and upfront in your writing. So that is definitely a strong suit that is incredible in your work. And for future audiences who are going to watch Rites of Passage, I hope you really look in on all of the nuances that Michelle incorporates in those characters. They're so multidimensional and real. They're like real people, which is hard to do in playwriting, especially from one voice, to generate all of those characters. So you're a journalist, which
Mhm.
is fascinating to me. I think that that's to be so on top of news, especially right now, I'm sure is really heavy, but you just got to do some amazing traveling. You had a
Oh
grant
yeah.
where
Yeah.
you were traveling internationally, researching both journalism and playwriting material, right?
I mean, technically no, because the grant was as a journalist, but
Okay.
wait, the grant was as a journalist, so I was only doing journalism while traveling. But
But as a playwright, we can only help how
well,
much gets snuck
Well, and
in.
Kira Obolinski, who is, I think I'm not butchering her last name too badly, is my mentor my first year at Spalding. She challenged me to write a play about my travels, because in the beat that I used to have in Kansas City, I covered race, identity, and culture, and we had this big controversy about the renaming of a street after Martin Luther King Jr., because the Casey Mo is the last big city to do
Hmm.
that. And then there was a vote. It was all complicated. But anyway, I pitched to the Pulitzer Center, hey, how about sending me to a few places around the world to see how they commemorate Dr. King? And I'll be
Yeah.
damned. They were like, okay. And so I got to go to Senegal, Dakar, Senegal in Africa, and Amsterdam, Netherlands, in Europe. And I got to go to, believe it or not, a place I'd never been, even though it's not that far away, Memphis, Tennessee, because
Cool.
that was the place where Dr. King was assassinated. But they just got a street named after him just a few years ago, so it was cool to have like a tale of three kings based on three different continents. And I really feel like I feel particularly lucky now because that travel was all right before the world, you know, got taken to task by the coronavirus and
Right.
keeps us all homebound. So, yeah.
So your mentor in your MFA program asked you to write a play based on these travels. So
Mhm.
clearly that influenced your playwriting. In your day-to-day work as a journalist, how much does that influence your playwriting?
How much does journalism?
Or your previous career as a lawyer? I mean, we
Well,
see a little bit of your influence of having been a lawyer in Rites of Passage.
I feel like um everything is sort of grist. What is the phrase? Grist for the mill. So in every play of mine, there are always these little tiny sort of Easter eggs that sometimes literally only I know about. Like only I know that I picked, cherry pie as the kind of pie somebody's eating in the Green Book Wine Club train trip because I cherry pie is my favorite pie, and rites of passage, the whole conversation about coffee, I mean, the small little nothing thing. It's just like, conversations I've had with people. And then the bigger things,
Mm-hmm.
like I told you guys the other night, how a friend of mine passed away a few years ago and how I named a character a very, not even a character, a place, a very pivotal place in the play after him is kind of an ode to both him and what I was writing about. So, um, you know, I try not to write about the law too much. This is the rare exception. Rites of passage. That was the very rare exception that I write about law. But I genuinely try to just incorporate a little bit of everything into what I do because it's all I think what a writer should do. A writer shouldn't just be about the autobiographical elements, but should just be about, what you notice, what you observe, and how you can weave that into the narratives you're telling.
Yeah, definitely.
By the way, world, anybody, the three people who are watching, my apologies. I just moved and changed cities in the middle of a pandemic, and I can't find my lipstick. So, I am lipstick free. And, with the masks, I wear a mask when I go out, so anyway, that's my apology to the world.
And you all better accept it. How, I mean, this is totally just out of left field, but you've just moved to Louisville. A lot of your plays are so poignant and beautiful, and they talk a lot about um, Black life, Black culture. You're a Black female playwright, and that influences your work. And how is the transition to Louisville, where the protests are still, happening in full swing? We talked a little bit about them being right outside your
Yeah.
window, and that was where Breonna Taylor was murdered. And um, how has that transition been overall? And do you think that it will influence do you have work that it's inspiring, or do you feel like it's just enough to just kind of be surviving right now?
Well, this has been a tough year for everybody, right? And I, in particular, have had a year of lots of transition. So, like earlier this year, I sold my family home that I've been living in for the last 14 years, but we moved into it when I was 9. So, I've lived in it on and off my entire, part of my childhood and my entire adult life. And so that was a big transition to move from that to an apartment, only to
Mm,
find out 4 months after I moved into the like greatest apartment in the world that I got a really great job in Louisville. And so, you know, then I move here. But as all of this is happening in the backdrop is the pandemic that we're all dealing with in
right.
terms of, all the things that got canceled, all the things you can't do. And then even moving to Louisville, which is a city I love. I lived here like 30 years ago as a young newspaper reporter. There's only so much I can do, only so
Hmm.
many people I can see because we're still in the middle of a pandemic.
Right.
So, and then you add to it, as you said, I'm living on Broadway Street, which is one of the paths that the protests take every day. And so, I mean, you literally, heard it during rehearsal the other night. And I mean, again, like with all my work, I think it's going to seep in. It's going, I mean,
Yeah.
even for the Rites of Passage, I was telling you about how my agent had wanted me to rewrite Rites of Passage to update it since it was written shortly after Ferguson. But as we talked about, I'm like, no, I want the fact that this stuff doesn't that it keeps happening to
Hmm.
be what makes the play. So if you do it, you do it, and you have to deal with the fact that it's a dated play while simultaneously being not dated at all. And as I said the other day, if we can go to dead white men playwrights every day and act
Yeah.
like what them writing about the 1940s is just something that we have to accept, or the 50s or the 60s or whatever, then I think people will be all right if they see a play of mine and it took place in 2015. I think they'll be all right. I think they
I
can live with it.
They will be all right. And
Mhm.
I think it's I think it's really powerful and should be noted that this play was written, I think you said originally in 2014, started writing in 2014. It's copyrighted 2016, and it still is just as relevant today.
Yeah.
The police brutality and civil injustices that are happening that rites of passage takes on are not being resolved. And
Mhm.
this play really speaks on that. It's so timely. So it's really interesting that it's, as you said, dated, even though, I mean, it's still, that's not too long ago, 5 years ago.
Right, 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 right.
But it's not, doesn't have maybe 2020 references, but it's still, the content is so extremely relevant. And that's what makes it really, really powerful as well. All of this has been a really great segue into my next question, if you're ready. So, you have your work produced nationally over the years. What do you think now about Rites of Passage being produced on a digital platform? Is that wild to you? Is it like just
Well,
rolling with the punches?
I'm like all theater people. We love the community of being together, right? I mean,
Yeah.
one of the most precious moments of my life have been that when you're in the room together. And what I love about being a playwright is that you're the most important person in the process until the actual process starts, and then you are the least important person in the process. And
Well,
it's a lot like being a producer of a talk show, which is what I do now. It's my job is to be the behind the scenes person that makes the host look great.
mm,
So if I do my job well, you don't see the strings. Not to say that I'm the puppeteer, because hosts are autonomous smart beings. But if I prepared my host well, and he or she is asking what they need to ask in a way that seems seamless, because then I've done my job. And it's the same thing with being a playwright. I mean, I I always say that the process as a playwright, even though I didn't have it this first rehearsal because the actors were so good, but in general, because we can we cuss on you can we cuss on YouTube? Can I drop
you
one F bomb?
can do what you want.
Okay. So So it goes from these folks are fucking up my shit to, oh wow, I wrote that, because the process takes a life of its own on, and a good director along with the good actors, and then all the, the props and the light and the sound designer, and everybody just, it's like they take it and make it so much more than what you were doing sitting there in your home communing with the screen.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, so to your question, I would never have guessed it before the other night, but it was beautiful that we had 11 people from 8 different cities.
Yeah.
How many time zones? Three, four time
Three
zones?
time zones.
3 time zones. And there was still just as much community and heart and togetherness and love and respect, and all the corny, beautiful, but really, really, really real things that happen when you're putting a play together. I mean, it
Yeah.
really, I mean, honestly, I had quit going to church right before I started writing plays. And then I realized a couple years into it, oh, this is my new church, full of
Yeah.
all full of all the same drama and backbiting and holiness combined with inappropriateness and all it's like,
All the good, all the bad.
exactly, exactly. I am still going to church.
Yeah. It's and I think it's really cool, the in the rehearsal space we get to see a little bit, but it's not quite like the performance level yet, but
Right,
we start to see how they really do interact. The actors interact even despite
right,
being like really like literally thousands of miles away from each other in their own
right.
individual homes, but that energy just comes. It's
Yeah.
theater magic. It's theater magic.
It is. I told you my favorite is instead of the actual exit of seeing somebody leave a stage,
Yeah.
where the exit is just like click, they're off. I
Yep.
don't know why, but that cracked me up every time the other night.
Yeah, it was a good bit of comedic relief, and it we talked a little bit about how it kind of mirrors to this social media mindset where people will come in and maybe stir up or contribute their point that they want to on someone's Facebook or Instagram post, and then they get to just like
Go
peace
boop.
out.
Right.
And
Right.
there was a little bit of metaphorical overlap with the camera pulls.
Exactly.
So with this production coming up, what do you hope the most that audiences will take from Rites of Passage?
Well, one thing I hope that they take away, and again, I thought about this after the rehearsal the other night, is one of my pet peeves on social media, and this is mainly white people who do this. I mean, honestly, there's nobody of color I really see do. I should say there's rarely a person of color that I see do this, but there's so many white folks who like to act like this presidency is the start of all things racial, like there was racism, and then there was this idyllic season of 100 years when there was no racism,
Yeah.
or even, well, we cured racism because we elected a black president, even though white people didn't elect a black president, because the majority of white people still went Republican. Because, as I have to remind people, the majority of white people have gone Republican since 1964. So when white people pat themselves on the back for voting for a black president, I'm like, you mean in conjunction with other people you helped elect a black president. So one of the things I think the play, I hope, reminds people of is that there was a time before Trump. There was a
Mm-hmm.
racism that and again, I'm saying this as a playwright, not as a journalist. As a journalist, I am a non-partisan person, but as a playwright, I, like to remind people that Donald J. Trump leveraged racism. He didn't, you know, resurrect it.
Right.
So,
And that's really important for audiences to think about too when they're watching this upcoming performance of Rites of Passage is that it was written pre
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump being president.
Mm-hmm.
These,
Pre
yes,
him being a
these,
candidate, pre him being a candidate. I mean, he was just a dude who was an old New Yorker who had a reality TV show that I watched in the early years.
yeah.
You
So
know?
these are not new issues.
Mm-mm.
Um, extremely problematic, ongoing
Yeah.
systemic racism that we are suffering from. As Michelle so well put in the beginning, we're suffering a normal pandemic and the COVID-19 crisis, and then the pandemic of racism as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Speaking of COVID-19, how do you think the COVID-19 crisis will affect the theater landscape long term, Michelle? Are you planning on writing for digital platforms specifically? We've seen that Broadway shut down through the rest of 2020. We know a lot of smaller theaters are still not operating or pushing their seasons further. What do you think that will look like, and how are you as an artist kind of digesting that information?
You know, I there's a part of me that thinks that so let me say this. As you know, I'm just a playwright. And what I mean by that is that my work is either done or it's not done. It's created in isolation. It's created on my own time schedule, except for the times when I occasionally have a commission. But my job is just to create the world, um, and then let the world decide how it wants it to show up.
Mm-hmm.
And so just like this play, I didn't write it for a digital, platform, but as we saw in rehearsal, it works in a digital platform, right?
Yeah,
I think probably half of my plays would work just fine in a digital platform if somebody wants to do them in a digital platform. But I don't think the theater's going anywhere. I think that there are
right,
theater companies, of course, who are having to worry about whether they can come back. But, Broadway makes a shit ton of money, is currently at this moment not making a shit ton of money. It will make a shit ton of money again. The Lion King will come back and it will be high ass prices. Again, Hamilton will come back and it again will be high ass prices. And yes, will there be people who are hurting in the meantime? I'm not trying to be flip to the people, to the little people, and by little people, people like myself who they just work for a living and their living is gone. Um, but I do believe theater will come back in its prior incarnation. But I think the role that we all have to have is how much of that is a good thing.
hmm.
Is it a good thing to just go back to the same old, with theaters doing the same old tired ass plays,
Yeah,
and we don't challenge people to think beyond the plays that we have told them are classic? And I'm not saying eliminate the classic, because I believe that the classics have their point, their place, but the classics also need to go with the current realities that people are living through and experiencing.
yeah, we want to see big theater do push the boundary. Art reflects society. We talk about this all the time. Art reflects, our current art reflects what we want to see.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't need to see big theater producing shows that have been produced for decades. We want to see producers putting their dollar on theater that pushes the envelope and asks hard social questions.
And I get that some people, I can, location, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
not just about housing, buying a house. That's about theater. I had a play that hits racial issues, not even all that hard, frankly, but it was picked up by a small theater company in a suburb where the average age is white and elderly. So the theater company loved the play,
Mm-hmm.
but the theater goers were like, because for one, if you're not even used to in your regular life talking to black people
Mm,
besides I'll have paper, not plastic, please. I mean, if you're not even used to having a real conversation with a real person of color,
right.
then it's going to be shocking to look on a stage where you're a captive audience and you're actually seeing black people um saying things that you would never see a black person say in front of you. And then my favorite is I mean, even though it was, I could just see them like clutching their pearls, and to see a black person argue, a black character argue with the white character, and for an older white character, I mean, sorry, an older white patron, that may be like,
Mm,
what? How dare she talk to her that way? Mm, mm. Yeah, Miss Daisy. People talk to folks that way. Next, So I mean, that's part of theater's job, is to make you think past your boundaries. But the
yeah,
bottom line is some people don't want to think past their boundaries. I mean, I pick on Lion King not because there is anything wrong with Lion King, but it's like that's gonna always make way more money than the newest joint by Michelle Tyrene Johnson, or, I could list, 20 playwrights, and not all black, not all of color. Like we're all in the same boat if we're not somebody who's in a theater um dramaturgy book.
yeah. We are going to take some, and that's the end of my questions that I had kind of planned up front for Michelle. And now we're going to take some questions from our live audience, and we already have some coming in. So I'll be asking Michelle those too, and we'll get to kind of see what you guys are curious about and want to hear from Michelle as well. So the first question that we have is, due to the intense moment your show is being produced during and its presence on YouTube, what would your greatest wish for this show and its message be? So we've talked a little bit about this,
Right.
but
Right. There's two things. There's the highly selfish, personal theater playwright of that somebody who's going to pay a lot of money to me and actors and a director goes, oh my God, we want to see this on stage. I mean, that's a personal selfish one. But seriously, for people who are watching it, I really do want them to. I mean, my favorite thing about any work I do, whether it's journalism or my playwriting, is the conversations that people have after they've read or heard my work. That's what there's no bigger high for me than for me to bump into somebody, or for someone to dig up an email
mm-hmm.
or send me a Facebook message and go, we were talking about the topic an hour after we left your show. We were talking
Yeah.
about that in the car drive. Now we're talking YouTube. It might be on your way to the kitchen, but if there's even one thing that said that makes you have a conversation and think about something the way you wouldn't have before, to me, I've done my job.
That's great. I hope kind of along those lines, like I know I've there's this I am doing it, and there's a big surge of book clubs and conversations happening on how to be better allies, how to be anti-racist. And a lot of that, the literature that's circulating is so important. But I kind of hope that when audiences watch this show, they bring those into those conversations as well, from an art standpoint. We have another question from the audience that says, how do we leverage your show's message to create the deep transformational change this country needs to end racism and white supremacy? That's a deep question. You're on mute, Michelle. Oh, we still can't hear you.
There you go.
There you go.
There you go. Here's the thing about art. Art meets people where they are. So, the best play in the world, the best movie, the best book, even the best song
Mm-hmm.
can't move people until
Mm-hmm.
they're open to be moved. I mean, yes, sometimes stuff can sort of sideways get you, and I mean, I think that is one of the things. It's like people sometimes mistake the humor in my plays for trying to be like, oh, it's a comedy. No, it's not a comedy. Pain and joy always go side by side.
Mm-hmm.
Tragedy and laughter always are hand in hand. And so for someone, for my work to have any kind of role in the so-called revolution of the country being anti-racist, I think the people who are racist are and the people who live in the comfortable bubble of, well, I'm a good liberal. So they have to be willing to see beyond themselves when they see my work.
Yeah.
So it's simultaneously you have to see you in my work, but you also have to see beyond yourself in the work. And honestly, I think that this country has a bad habit of telling the same old fairy tales about who and what it is and pushes against the reality of it. And that's what this moment is about. This moment is about making people stop defaulting to the most comfortable way of looking at this country. That is what this moment is about. And what I am proud of is the people who don't shut their asses up just because other people are sick of hearing about it. I don't care if you're sick of hearing about it. I'm sick of having to talk about it. You know, I remember I did diversity and inclusion training for years. And I remember, and it was a white guy who said to me 20 years ago, don't you think, do you even think that this work is going to be relevant all that long? And I'm like, yes, because unfortunately, people's bigotry doesn't go away. And I'm not talking racism. It's what is it? What is the meme I saw today? You are privileged if you've never had to have the Supreme Court make a decision on a basic right.
On your rights. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, until we get, I mean, I would love to have plays about not race, because race is beautiful. Race is beautiful. I'm gonna always write about race, but I would love to have a day where writing about racism is like writing about you know people walking around in togas as their regular attire. But alas, racism keeps requiring new stories, just like sexism, just like ageism, just like, people who are fighting the good fight about disabilities. I mean, those things don't go away just because we're nice people when we want them to be. You know,
Yep.
so often in America, it's about other people's discomfort, not about the pain of the people who are experiencing something.
Yep. We have a real lack of empathy.
Hmm. And yet there's some study that says that theater helps with empathy. So let's hope there's more theater and more empathy.
Yeah. I think I think that's something that could be hopefully really taken from Rites of Passage. We see the main character, Pat, have stand
Don't
her
give anything
ground.
away. Don't give anything away.
I'm not going to give everything away. I'm just saying we see her stand her ground, but she's also a truly empathetic
Yeah.
woman, and that's really powerful. It's
Mm-hmm.
to to be open to that. Everyone needs a lot more of that
Mm-hmm.
empathy. We have another question from the audience, and then we'll get close to kind of wrapping up. And I'll talk a little bit at the end about how you can watch Rites of Passage and donate to and get some donation-based tickets. So this question says, what has been the most rewarding part of your writing process for you as an individual, Michelle?
Um, I think the most rewarding part is having an outlet, as a writer where I can put it all on the page and don't have to just um, bitch about certain things to my friends, or, and I don't even mean, let me just say this. So many of my plays are as much about family
Mhm.
and personal journeys as there are about the big ticket issues like race. And so sometimes I write a play just because, my heart is broken about something, and my play is a way to um have those feelings transmuted into something that other people maybe can relate to.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's most rewarding. What's most rewarding is when, and it's like the first play that I ever had staged. It was a 10-minute play in a festival. And when the person next to me was like, who didn't know who I was, let alone that I was the playwright, and it was a play about Alzheimer's, which my family
Mm.
was dealing with because of my grandmother who has since passed away. And when she turned to her friend or a relative and says, I don't know who wrote that, but boy, they get it. They really get it, you know? And that to me, I feel like that's the most rewarding thing, is that I get to share space with people in the place where they are, whether it's their pain, whether it's their joy, whether it's their intellectual curiosity about something.
Yeah. Ugh. I mean, what a wonderful answer. Couldn't have said it better myself. Well, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today, Michelle, and for sharing your heart as an artist and for sharing your play with us. I hope that all of you guys who are watching today and many, many more come and join us right here, same place, Four Walls Theater YouTube channel, to watch
Yes.
Rites of Passage by Michelle Tyrene Johnson on July 10th at 8 Eastern Time, 7 Central, 5 Pacific. If you would like to see all of the information about this play, you can find our Eventbrite, which I think our artistic director may be able to put that link in the comments right now. Sorry, Alana, that I'm asking you to do that last minute, but maybe she can put that there. If not, you can get on Eventbrite, search Rites of Passage, it pops up right away, and you can find information about the show, how to watch, again, coming right here, and you can do a donation-based ticket. It's pick your price, any amount helps. Every portion, a donation, let me try this again. A portion of every donation that comes into this show goes towards Black Lives Matter, our spotlighted charity. We are so excited to be able to give to them through this performance. And this performance, our previous performances of our Four Walls Theater shows, are up on our YouTube if you want to watch those past performances. But Rites of Passage is a limited engagement. It will only be up through July 24th. So come and watch it live. And if you can't watch it live, enjoy it really quickly thereafter and enjoy the amazing performances that are here to come. Again, Eventbrite for donation-based tickets. Read more about Black Lives Matter. Catch us on our social media. And thank you to Michelle for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It was fun.
Of course.